Good day, everyone. My name is Joanna Leone, and I am the Director of WERC Membership. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to attend today's presentation, Creating Industrial Athletes in Your DCs, sponsored by Envista. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all participants are in listen-only mode. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer period. Depending on your settings, you can ask your questions through the Q&A or chat section located at the bottom of your screen or along the right-hand side. So without further ado, I would like to turn the presentation over to today's speaker, Bo Thompson.
All right, thanks, Joanna. So today we're going to talk about industrial athletes in your DCs. As part of the abstract, distribution centers are challenged with rising labor costs, high turnover, shifting customer demand. So these pressures make it essential to uncover productivity opportunities, engage with associates, and drive performance across the organization. So that'll be the topic of our discussion and around industrial athletes. So we'll first introduce Envista as well. So I work for Envista. We're a supply chain consulting company focused on people, processes, and technology. We have a strategy group that does network strategies, operation strategy, facility designs. We do supply chain system implementations. We have an automation group that implements goods to persons, conveyor systems, and some pre-builds. And we also have a managed services group that does IT support, manages servers, and what have you there. We were founded in 2002. I've been personally with Envista for 16 years. So I've been around for, majority of that ride. We have 320 plus associates here in the US, across the US, and then also in India. Over the course of those, since 2002, we've delivered over 9,000 solutions. We have a diverse customer base, ranging from mid-markets to Fortune 50 companies, I would even say. And we got 1,200 plus customers throughout our retail, wholesale, manufacturing, and distribution industries. That's a little bit about Envista. We'll now go into the agenda. So as we talk through industrial athletes in your DCs, we want to talk about why are industrial athletes needed? Why are we in the situation we're in? What is an industrial athlete, right? And how do what do you do to make industrial athletes successful? We're going to ask that we kind of hold questions until the end, and then at which we'll have a QA session. So why are industrial athletes needed? Right, so we have some charts here just that kind of look at, if we look at overall supply chain costs, and this is across the Envista customer base, we look at about anywhere from 10 to 20%, depending on your industry, depending on your network, that sit within the distribution variable costs, right? That number is growing as you look at the wage rate, right? Wage rate is increasing at a faster rate than the remaining industries, right? Which you've all experienced, right? And employee tenure is also decreasing 3 times faster than what we see in other industries, right? All this information is available in the BLS, but that's a challenge when it comes to training and impacts to productivity, right? Also, Envista finds that most of our customers that we assess are sitting around 65 to 80% of their potential throughput levels, which presents the opportunity to increase that productivity, focus in on safety, focus in on quality to make sure that we're providing the best customer service we can from those distribution centers. But, at a higher level, it's incumbent upon the operations to look for those efficiencies within the facility, manage the cost, and simplify that operation. When we would look at operations, we find that probably about 72% of our recommendations to our customers would be what we deem as tactical recommendations, right? Those fit in this bubble matrix. I'll take a step back and explain this bubble matrix to you. But Here you have one-time investment on one axis and difficulty to implement on another axis. The size of the bubble is based upon the savings that generates to the operation. But what we find here is the majority of our recommendations fall into that bottom left-hand quadrant, which we would identify as tactical recommendations, that these can be done, or these can be identified and implemented without consulting help, right? You see, like writing on receiving labels, lean tools can help you with these and be available for you to identify within your operation. When we look at a process, right, it's important for us to understand what are the steps in the process and use lean principles to kind of group those processes into value-added steps, required non-value-added steps, and non-value-added steps. Required non-value-added steps would be something that's required as part of the process, but not value-added to complete the process, right? So what I would identify as value-added is obtaining and placing that pallet, working with that RF, right? What I would identify as required non-value-added would be paperwork, because I have to have it in order to complete the process, but I could minimize those activities. Also, travel is a big component in required non-value-added time. And then obviously we have your non-value-added time, which you want to focus on eliminating. But when you look here in this process flow, you see a lot of steps within this process and a lot of decisions. And that's where the focus is. How do we look at these processes and identify what can I minimize, what can I eliminate through this process? For one, to simplify the process, but another, to make the process more efficient. So coming out of these, we have a lot of examples of opportunities that industrial athletes can address. So if you look from an inbound side, being able to prioritize your trailers that need to be unloaded based upon detention charges, based upon product that's needed for outbound orders. Also, understand your inbound dock capacity and scheduling inbound trailers to that capacity. If we go beyond our capacity, then we're setting ourselves up for detention charges, right? As part of the receiving process, scanning instead of typing on the RF is very important. If you look at that, it takes about 1 to 3 seconds, depending on the RF, to type a character, right? So when you add all those different types characters up, if I could just scan that and get entry of everything, it'd be a lot more efficient. Next, removing any writing or paperwork from the process, leveraging your system to do some of that, to capture some of that information, identifying exceptions. All these things are important. Even if you go to capturing the required data elements, we often find that we want to set ourselves up on outbound or allow inbound to set up our outbound operation, right? So if we don't capture the right data elements as part of inbound, we may be putting product away to the wrong location, putting product into a location that won't fit, right? Not cubing effectively within our WMS. So we want to be able to capture those data elements. And then finally, optimizing put away so that I'm putting my product in the ideal location. So I'm setting up my replenishment whenever I need to replenish a pick face on the outbound side. There's more across replenishment and picking and packing and loading, but we often find identifying the ideal pick pass, right? Not releasing our pick task until our replenishment is complete. That is challenging for operation because we want to keep our pickers picking, but yet I don't want to keep my pickers picking if they then have to skip a location, come back to it, short a pick because the replenishment wasn't created. So that kind of also ties into determining your priority for your replenishments based upon the need. Slotting and pick location sizing is very important. Having from 5 to 10 days of inventory in a pick location is ideal. On the packing and loading side, there's a lot of movement in a packing operation, right? So ensuring product is easily obtainable and you have enough product so that you're not constantly have to replenish your packing stations. right? Again, going back to it, having the right layout and staging lanes for your outbound dock, right? So that can improve the flow and turn that outbound dock. So those are just a few examples of what we see as opportunities that can be addressed by industrial athletes across the operation. So let's put some numbers to this, right? We kind of saw that a little bit earlier, but these are examples that we found across our assessments. But if you look at 5Sing at loading dock and creating that efficient flow, decreasing that congestion, ensuring I have enough staging locations for the flow of my operation, right? That improvement improved loading by 12%. It also had an impact on picking by 4%, which relates to $60,000 in savings, right? That's a very low level effort, right? With a low cost to execute, right? The next one, slotting. Slotting is a little bit more difficult, right? You see a higher cost to execute, a little bit more time to value, but it has a big impact because it's impacting all your picking operations, right? And you don't have to reslot all your SKUs. Focus on that 80-20 rule, right? Or what are those year-round SKUs that are constantly moving, so that I have those set up with the right location, with the right capacity, so I'm not having to constantly replenish those. Training and SOPs are very important, right? Not only creating those SOPs, training to those processes, but not just letting it be, how do I work within the system? It also needs to dictate how I actually perform the task. So take, for instance, if you're in a case pick operation where you're working with a walkie rider, I could either dismount or park that lift in a certain area that's going to optimize the steps that I take to and from that lift. If I improve that by 4 seconds, and I just in the way I dismount right or left and the way I park that machine, so that as I pick product, the pallet's right across from me, that's 4 to 6 seconds per location that an operation saves. If you look at somebody picking over 1,000 locations a day, that's 4,000 to 6,000 seconds. So focusing on those repeatable tasks are important. Also, when you look at receiving, looking at a mobile receiving cart, if you're having to constantly go get paperwork, constantly go print out paperwork, print out labels, maybe having a mobile receiving cart makes a lot of sense, because it eliminates all that non-value added walking, right? There's a cost associated with that cart, but also there's an improvement of productivity. Finally, system driven replenishment, and having that replenishment properly zoned, so that whenever I go to obtain a pallet to replenish the pick location, or obtain a case to a pick location, understanding what that optimal setup is within your WMS can drive a lot of efficiency into your replenishment process, but also minimize those stockouts as part of your picking process. So again, all these you'll see have a low cost to execute, a low time to value. But if you look at all those opportunities across the operation, they add up to significant savings. And that's really the focus of driving productivity, driving safety, driving improvements throughout a warehouse. So what is an industrial athlete? An industrial athlete is just any team member focusing on improving the operation. What we will tell you, right, is that you have to have industrial athletes across the organization, right? So if I'm just focusing on my associates and supervisors, do I have somebody that's going to then implement those changes, reinforce those changes, right? So I need those industrial athletes across the organization, right? So at the associate level, associates deal with the pain points of the operation every day. They know where the opportunities lie. They might not know the resolution to them, but they also know when things change in a warehouse too, right? Supervisor leads, they understand the daily workloads, they understand how process exceptions occur, and they understand the morale of the associates, right? The focus I want of the supervisor is to coach the associate, minimize that indirect time, and be on the floor as much as possible, right? Oftentimes we find that we ask our supervisor and leads to do too much when it comes to working at a terminal, like, and that ultimately keeps them away from the operation, keeps them away from the associates. Whereas the associate, I want them perfecting their process, right? Reporting those opportunities to the supervisor, so that the supervisor then can work with the ops manager and the GM to evaluate those opportunities and then look to make change to the operation. As you get to the ops manager, they understand the operation from a different point of view, right? They understand how all work gets released to the floor. They understand capacity limitations, and they understand how the product flows to the facility, right? That's a different view and different bottlenecks and different pain points that can occur within the operation. So not only do they have a different view of the operation, right, but they also understand how those different departments in the operation work together, right? So that's where you can identify some additional opportunities, but also we want from that operation ops manager, is to ensure that the work's available, it's prioritized. We have to be adjusting staffing levels by area, but we also want them to be driving the implementation of those improvements, right? At a GM level, right? Every GM sets the tone for the operation, and they're ultimately responsible for the culture, right? So we need that GM to be celebrating success, empowering the associates, but the GM's also looking at how am I determining those staffing levels, how am I managing the business based upon the overall KPIs I have for the building, right? So, but having these four different groups work together is how we identify and implement improvements to the operation, right? You may have additional roles such as industrial engineering that can help be a support role or help drive some of this change as well. But it's just, every operation is different. But when we look at areas for improvement, it's not just operational efficiency. Operational efficiency, you see I have it listed as fourth, right? The first two, I would say both number ones, customer focus and safety, right? We need to make sure that we don't become too efficient and create quality errors, right? We also need to make sure that we're respecting safety and doing and looking at improvements from a safety perspective. Culture and associate morale is also very important, as well as inventory accuracy. If I have an inventory accuracy issue, if I don't address that issue immediately, it's going to cause another issue for the next, task that goes and picks out that location, right? So I need to address my inventory accuracy issues, and I need to make sure my processes are sound so they don't create inventory accuracy issues as I execute process across multiple different people. And finally, MHE maintenance. I need my conveyor systems to be, to have low downtime. So anything I can do to focus on those areas as well is important to the operation. So if we look at, the different levels of those roles of industrial athletes, it's also, we're trying to create a feedback mechanism. And a feedback mechanism, it's necessary not only to identify those opportunities, but determine what the recommendation or the resolution to that to those opportunities, justify the change, and then implement the change, right? And that's why we're driving industrial athletes across different levels of the operation. So if we start with that first associate to supervisor relationship, I would say this is the most important relationship within the operation, right? We find that a lot, when people leave, it's contributed to that management supervisor relationship. Or when people stay or people have higher tenure, it's because of that relationship and also the culture of the building. But supervisors need to be conducting observations of their associates to provide feedback to help them perfect that process, right? We want associates to be working smarter, not harder, right? We want that supervisor providing feedback on how the associate's performing to expectation, however you track your KPIs, right? But we also want that associate to provide feedback on what they see as opportunities to improve the process or obstacles that's creating downtime or rework within the operation, right? They may not know the resolution, they may not know what is causing the issue, but they know what they're dealing with, right? And then as we move up across this circle, then we go and talk about the ops manager to supervisor relationship, right? Ops managers need to be providing that daily order volume and priorities to supervisors during their daily stand-ups, right? They need to be reviewing productivity and utilization along with action plans that they're doing to address some of those um, uh, um, whatever actions that they have within the facility. But we also want that to be an opportunity where supervisors bring those process opportunities that are creating obstacles to productivity to the ops manager and have a collective discussion on actionable items, right? You're going to get a lot of feedback from your associates. So you have to prioritize those based upon what's going to provide real improvement to the operation, right? But it's also important, going back to the associate supervisor relationship, that we're taking action, right? If we don't take action, our associates are going to quit providing us feedback. Then we kind of move over to the ops GM relationship, right? That's an important relationship because GM should be reviewing reporting KPIs of the facility, understanding what the operation's successes and failures are, right? They need to be working with those ops managers to determine those actionable opportunities and prioritizing those changes, right? And maybe having to justify some capital investment in order to make those changes, right? So that's where we maybe be getting industrial engineering involved, or we may have to get IT involved, right? But they need to be prioritizing and determining what are the requirements in order to make those changes, right? And then going back to complete this circle, the GM and associate relationship is very important. Again, the GM sets the culture of the operation, but it's imperative they know their associates, they praise them for hard work, right? GMs should be reporting on the progress of the changes to the operations and their weekly, monthly stand-ups, the benefit those changes are making to the operations, right? I'll go back and tell you, as we do a lot of 3PL selection work, where we're selecting 3PLs for our customers, right? We'll tell people, I can have the best 3PL out there, but the 3PL is only going to be as good as the general manager operating that building, right? So finally, it's important for that GM to celebrate successes with those associates, right? And give them feedback on the appreciation they have for those changes. Because if we don't have this continuous feedback loop, right, and it goes beyond just, associate and operations manager can also have a relationship. It's not a one-to-one relationship here, but it's important that we provide this feedback loop so that we're getting information and insight into things that may be causing issues. So let's talk through an example, right? So, this is a real example that we had as part of an operation we were supporting, right? And it relates to productivity. So we had, a supervisor performing an observation of associate performing a case picking task, right? The associate provided feedback at the end of that observation that the travel is taking a lot longer than it did a month ago, right? Didn't know how much, but they said it was impactful. The supervisor brought the opportunity up with the ops manager, right? The ops manager then did a review of the case picking performance. They found that their cases per hour was down, but their productivity levels remained at target, which seemed very odd, right? What's the reason behind this? Well, if you have a labor management system and it's calculating standards discretely, right? It calculates the travel that the person traveled, right? Then it's adjusting and giving more time for that associate to travel. So it says they're still hitting their productivity targets, right? But the ops manager then investigated and noticed that the picking tasks were out of sequence, right? They got with IT and they reviewed and made updates to that pick sequence to drive efficiency. And if you look here in the current issue, right, you'll see that they started here and they came all the way down the far side of the building and traveled back towards the east side of the building. But what they did is they changed their layout location, their staging locations to be back down on the west side of the building. So the associate was incurring this deadhead travel back to where they would pick up their new pallet and restart their process. So they went through a root cause analysis and ultimately relayed out the pick sequence to adjust the new staging locations for where the new staging locations were, right? And updated that travel path. And then they observed the result to see if that cases per hour increased. So what makes industrial athletes successful, right? It really comes down to, developing relationships, taking action on opportunities, and creating organizational accountability, right? We're going to go into each of these, right? But relationships are foundational, right? People people want to do a good job, right? You look at self-actualization. People want to feel connected with other people and they want to know people care about them, right? And they want to feel empowered to make a difference, right? So it's important you understand your employees' context and listen to them and remove barriers to their success. But also, if their idea isn't the best idea, you still listen and take note, right? Your employees are closest to the work. They likely have the most relevant ideas. So listen, right? When leading people, make sure you spend time with those people and you give them plenty of opportunities to hear their voices. Maybe you haven't been able to do an observation in a while, but maybe you catch somebody on a break or a daily shift startup and spend a little time and ask them if they've been seeing anything within the operation. But it's important that we empower our people, we listen to our people, and to the next step, we act on those opportunities. So when we look at that, it's creating a culture for continuous improvement. It should be top down and bottom up. When I mean it's top down, management should be setting an expectation of overall improvement for the building across the year. But at the end of the day, it's going to come from the bottom up of where those improvements are going to come from. Yes, we do want managers out on the floor. We do want GMs out on the floor doing Gemba walks, right? Because that is important as well, because they look at things from a different perspective. But a lot of those ideas come from the bottom up. As I said, we want leadership engaged, leading those Kaizen events, doing those Gemba walks. But we want employees should be driving that change based upon their frontline experience, right? They should be identifying those opportunities. And what you see there in the middle, right? We want to learn those opportunities. We want to plan and determine possible solution, quantify that expected benefit. We want to act by executing those identified solutions and gathering qualitative and quantitative data to support it. And then we want to validate that improvement gave what we were expecting it to see, because we may have to adjust our recommendation based upon the impact it has to the operation. Finally, well, lean principles, they're very important, right? So we do a lot of yellow belt and green belt training, right? But lean principles is important to educate across your workforce, right? There's a lot of different lean principles and what you were trying to show here. There's visual management, there's value stream mapping, there's A3 thinking, 5S plus safety, Kaizen events, root cause analysis, creating standard work, right? But it's important for us to understand, as we go through and we implement what each of these lean principles are driving at, right? We want to make sure that we're driving at using A3 thinking to drive equality at the source, right? We want to make sure that we have standard work that documents the specific steps systemically and physically we want the associates to take, because we want consistency, right? We want to 5S and organize the warehouse, right? So for one, that we have safe, efficient flow paths through the warehouse, right? But two, so people know where things are. right? So it's a combination of all these lean principles that's going to also support and help drive those efficiencies. We need to also maintain a continuous improvement program where we're identifying the dashboards that we're tracking, not only at the facility level, but at the associate level, at the supervisor level, because they're all focused on different aspects of the operation. But we also want to create utilize those lean principles to drive, quarterly, bi-quarterly Kaizen events, right? We will want to see our ops managers and our general managers out on the floor doing Gemba walks, speaking with employees, asking for ideas. We want our supervisors doing those observations and coaching and counseling sessions, so that they're giving feedback to the associate to perfect that process, but they're also soliciting opportunities to improve the process. Finally, it all ends with accountability, right? This is to the right there, you'll see, the personal accountability loops. I personally, was taught this at Envista. This is from Mark Jacobs, Making Yourself Indispensable, the Power of Personal Accountability. But really what you have is you have an accountability loop and you have a victim loop, right? Accountability loop is, hey, everybody's going to make a mistake, right? You need to recognize that, own it, and take action. Whereas if you're in the victim loop, you're going to ignore it, rationalize it, resist it, right? So it all starts with intention, right? We measure ourselves based upon our intentions, while other people measure us based upon our actions, right? So if I have intention and I don't make the choice to take action on that intention, then I'm not making progress, right? And I need to I need to control the job through taking action, right? And then finally, we have to have a mechanism to report, right? If I'm not reporting on productivity, what's the saying out there? You can't manage what you don't measure, right? You need whether it's a labor management system or whether it's some type of KPI tracking system, we need to be tracking efficiency and productivity down to the associate level, but also grouping that at different levels within the organization, so that we know managers, they're doing their coaching sessions, they're driving down indirect work, right? They're keeping their team focused, right? So if you look at this, labor management is more than just reporting, right? A labor management program starts with standardizing the work so that you can build engineered standards to make the work consistent, right? To make the process consistent, eliminate the variability, right? But also it creates an associate engagement as we go through when we do those observation and coaching sessions and solicit that feedback, right? It allows us to understand the impact of our recommendations, right? And what did they do on productivity? What did they do on customer SLAs? Right? We want to be able to measure the improvement of the opportunity and then report that improvement back to the associates, right? And across the organization. Finally, companies have the ability to then utilize that labor-driven KPIs to identify opportunities and drive discussions, those cost benefits. Is it worth us implementing a change in the process, right? You can get a lot out of that based upon how your engineered labor standards are developed. So looking at that and not just saying it has to be labor management, but it has to be some type of accountability program to be able to track results and how everybody within the operation is performing. So if I take these key takeaways of the webinar, right? We've got increasing labor costs. We've got decreasing labor availability. We got rising turnover. We got lower tenure, right? So we need to do something different. We need to be managing those costs and driving productivity improvements, but we also need to be empowering those associates to drive some of that change or identify that change, but also improve that turnover because we're empowering them. We know that 72% of our recommendations are tactical in nature, and they can be identified by the operation. They have short time to value, so they can show improvement quickly, right? Industrial athletes, they're required across associate and management levels to create that continuous feedback mechanism. So that's all I have for today. Again, I'm Bo Thompson. I want to call out that we are, as part of this, we are providing the team, if you respond to the email we'll send out and provide your address, we'd like to send you a copy of our Supervising on the Line book. It's a self-help guide geared towards frontline supervisors. So we'd like to provide that to you, and then we'd like to open this up to have a Q&A session.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our session. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We do have a few, Bo, that have come in. The first is, how do I get an industrial athlete program started?
Well, to start a program, you really need to start with creating that, what I talked about, that relationship between the supervisors and the associates, right? That's probably the most foundational piece about the industrial athlete program. But it's also good to be able to start doing some lean training as part of that, some yellow belt, green belt training to your frontline supervisors, to your associates on the floor, so that they grasp the concept of the program, right? And then we want to socialize that and take action on it. So I would say, creating that relationship, or maybe the relationship's obviously already there, modifying that relationship and focusing that relationship, and then having a change agent through training to start the program.
Thank you. Another question that came through, how do I identify industrial athletes within my organization?
We would say, at the associate level, we find the best whenever we go and do programs. We would say that, those people that have been there for a longer period of time are good to have there, because they've seen the operation, seen different facets of the operation. Those would be key people you'd want to target. And then people that are committed. A lot of management, the frontline supervisors, they know their staffs, right? They know that those change agents that are going to take this initiative and run with it. So that's who I would identify at the associate level. And then at the management level, we really need all management engaged as part of the program.
Understood. Next question was, what type of training does an industrial athlete need to thrive?
I would say, kind of going back to that lean training around the yellow belts for the associates, right? Of just understanding those lean concepts, right? And understanding the objectives of lean, which is continuous improvement. But also, we can have that training, but we have to take action on that training. So if we're going to invest in the training, we need to start doing some of those Kaizen events, making some of those changes, because the program's not going to take off unless you start showing the operation you're committed.
Thanks. Very interesting. Another question we have that came through is, how do we prioritize opportunities derived from the program? Also, how frequently do we need to meet to discuss those opportunities?
In terms of frequency, I really think it comes down to the operations ability to implement change, right? Because you're going to, as you identify and move forward with initiatives, you need to get those into production, and then report on progress. So it's on how fast the operation can make the change to how frequently you're going to meet, because it's important to get into production what you've already said you're going to get into production. But I would say we need to constantly be collecting. It's important for our supervisor levels to be meeting with associates on, doing those coaching and counsel, coaching and observation sessions, weekly, right? But it's also important that we have a mechanism where we're passing for those ideas, right, and prioritizing those ideas back up to the management layers, right? So I would say it's probably good to meet weekly and at least discuss the new opportunities that have come through and determine what we're going to prioritize as a management team. Going to how we're going to prioritize, that's where you identify what's the opportunity, right? Obviously, where the more you have labor, right, the higher amount of labor, the more impact it's going to have to the overall productivity of the building, right? But it's also important to understand from a standpoint of flow, right? And finally, as you go through and do justification of those opportunities, you want to understand, what's going to give the quickest impact, as well as the quickest impact from a time to value perspective, but also from a standpoint of how much productivity am I going to get from this one change. So looking at those 3 or 4 things to determine what's the initiative that we're going to prioritize, or what group of initiatives we're going to prioritize.
Thanks. We had one come in that we'd like to talk about. The question was, how intensive are your supervisor observations? Do they track tack times and observe performance to SOPs? And how many observations do you recommend supervisors do?
Well, it's really dependent on your supervisor to associate ratio, on how many that they're going to have to do. We'd like for them to be spending time with them weekly or every other week. As far as that coaching and observation, that's really dependent on the cycle time, how long I'm spending with them. You would definitely want to capture one cycle of a process, right? So depending on the cycle time of the process is going to depend on how long you spend with that associate, right? But as you go in and have those conversations afterwards, how's that associate been doing from a standpoint of productivity? Yeah, and then as you observe the associate doing the process, you want to look against those SOPs and say, hey, here's the opportunities in which you can improve, right? What we've also found effective with people that have some turnover and newer workforce is like identifying the top 10 tips on how to work smarter within a process, right? So these things are, when I talked about earlier, how you dismount a lift and how you park that lift is going to impact how many steps you take while you're at the location. So that because it happens multiple times throughout the day and you're going to thousands of locations, that's going to be something you want to prioritize.
Thanks, Bo. And one last question. How do we celebrate the successes of the Industrial Athlete Program?
That's really dependent on the culture of the operation, right? I've seen people that where they'll go they'll just, for one, we just need to celebrate and call out during daily stand-ups, during weekly stand-ups or monthly stand-ups within the whole organization, call out individuals that came up with those ideas, right? But I've also seen it where you put a monetary benefit behind it. And I had a company that gave, $100, $150 to the best idea of the quarter, right? So putting some monetary benefit behind it is good, or whether it's a credit at the store, or, within the cafeteria, maybe another option. But, saying thank you and showing appreciation goes a very far way. I think everybody on this call probably understands that, right? But also finding ways to motivate and reward through monetary, through a paid day off, what have you, or unique ways based upon your specific culture that you would want to reward those associates.
Thanks, Bo. That's the last of our questions. If anyone has any additional questions, please put them in the Q&A portion of this webinar, and we can follow up with you after the webinar is completed.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you again on behalf of our presenters and work organization. Watch your email box. You should have a link to the recording, and then watch also for an email from Kristen and Bo on how to take advantage of that free complimentary copy of your book in your box. We hope you enjoyed the rest of your day and have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.